There are few stories as famous and as profoundly misunderstood as the parable of the Good Samaritan. We have turned it into a gentle children's story, a simple morality tale about the importance of being nice to people. The term Good Samaritan has become a cultural shorthand for any act of kindness to a stranger. But in doing so, we have stripped the story of its explosive, radical, and deeply uncomfortable power. This was not a gentle story. This was a psychological bomb thrown by Jesus into the heart of a deeply religious and tribalistic culture. It was not a call to be nice. It was a brutal and brilliant deconstruction of a religious system that had become more concerned with defining purity than with practicing compassion. To understand this, we must become archaeologists of meaning. We must excavate the story from the layers of sentimental varnish and see it for what it was: a direct attack on religious hypocrisy. The story, as told in the Gospel of Luke, begins not with a question of kindness, but with an act of intellectual aggression. An expert in religious law, a lawyer, stands up to test Jesus. His goal is not to learn, but to trap. He asks a question about eternal life, and when Jesus turns it back on him, the lawyer correctly recites the great commandment: to love God with all your heart, and to love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus affirms his answer: do this, and you will live. But the lawyer is not satisfied. The text says he wanted to justify himself. He wanted to find a loophole. He needed to define the limits of his obligation. So he asks the question that launches the parable: and who is my neighbor? Let us be clear about what he is asking. This is not an open-hearted inquiry. This is a legalistic question. He is asking, where does my responsibility end? Who is inside the circle of my concern, and who is outside? Who am I required to love? And who can I legitimately ignore or even hate? It is a question designed to draw boundaries. And Jesus, in his typical genius, does not answer the question directly. Instead, he tells a story designed not to define a neighbor, but to shatter the very act of defining. A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among robbers who stripped him and beat him and departed, leaving him half dead. The road from Jerusalem to Jericho was notoriously dangerous, a winding, desolate path known as the Way of Blood. The audience would have immediately recognized the setting. The man is stripped, beaten, and left for dead. He is in a state of ultimate vulnerability. Now, by chance, a priest was going down that road. The audience would have leaned in. A priest, a man of God, a professional holy man. He is the first responder we would all hope for. But when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. Shocking. But a moment later, a Levite comes along. Levites were assistants to the priests in the temple, another member of the religious establishment. So likewise, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. Why? Why would these two religious leaders, men whose entire lives were dedicated to serving God, ignore a man on the brink of death? Are they simply callous, heartless individuals? That is the easy and lazy interpretation. The reality is far more damning. As an archivist of meanings, we must understand their world. The priest and the Levite were bound by a complex system of purity laws, laid out in books like Leviticus. A central tenet of these laws was avoiding contact with anything that would make them ritually unclean, and therefore unfit for their sacred duties in the temple. And the two greatest sources of impurity were blood and a dead body. The man on the road was half dead. He was certainly bleeding. To touch him would have been to guarantee ritual defilement. It would have required them to undergo a lengthy and expensive process of purification. It would have disqualified them from their work, their service to God. So they were faced with a choice between their religious duty and their human duty, between their ritual purity and their basic compassion. And they chose their religion. They chose the system. They walked to the other side of the road, not because they were evil, but because their theology gave them a righteous justification for their lack of love. Their holiness had become a form of hypocrisy. And now, Jesus delivers the narrative blow that would have scandalized his audience. But a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was. We cannot overstate the shock of this. In the first century Jewish imagination, there was no such thing as a Good Samaritan. The conflict between Jews and Samaritans was ancient, deep, and bitter. They were seen as ethnic half-breeds and religious heretics. They were the ultimate other, the ultimate enemy. For Jesus to make a Samaritan the hero of his story was a deliberate, calculated, and deeply offensive act. He was choosing the most despised person imaginable to be the moral center of his parable. And what does this despised outcast do? He sees the man, and he had compassion. This is the first and most important action. His response is not governed by a rule book or a purity code, but by a visceral, human emotion. His compassion then translates into direct, costly action. He goes to him. He crosses the road. He willingly enters the space of suffering and impurity. He bound up his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. This was the standard medical treatment of the day. He uses his own valuable resources to care for his enemy. He set him on his own animal and brought him to an inn and took care of him. He sacrifices his own comfort for the comfort of the wounded man. And the next day, he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, "Take care of him, and whatever more you spend, I will repay you when I come back." He not only provides immediate care, but he guarantees future care. His compassion has a follow-through. This is not a cheap, sentimental kindness. This is a gritty, costly, and all-encompassing love. It is a love that crosses boundaries, ignores taboos, and takes on personal risk and expense, all for the sake of a stranger who is also his enemy. Having finished the story, Jesus now turns back to the lawyer, and he performs a brilliant reversal. The lawyer had asked, "Who is my neighbor?" This is a question of definition. It is a question of the head. It places the speaker at the center and asks him to categorize others as either neighbor or not neighbor. Jesus asks a different question entirely. Which of these 3, do you think, proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers? Do you see the genius of this shift? Jesus changes the question from "Who is my neighbor?" to "Who acted like a neighbor?" He shifts the focus from identity to action, from a passive category to an active verb. The story is not about how to define the people who are worthy of our love. The story is about what it means to be the kind of person who loves. The neighbor is not the one who shares your ethnicity, your religion, or your politics. The neighbor, in Jesus' radical reframing, is the one who chooses to cross the road. The lawyer, trapped by the story's irrefutable logic, is forced to answer, He cannot even bring himself to say the word Samaritan. He mutters, "The one who showed him mercy." And Jesus delivers the final, inescapable command. "You go and do likewise." This ancient parable is a timeless diagnostic tool for our own souls and for our own societies. We all travel our own roads to Jericho. And on those roads, we are constantly confronted with the wounded, the broken, the marginalized. And we all have our own priests and Levites inside of us. We have our own sophisticated justifications for crossing to the other side of the road. "I'm too busy. It's not my problem. Someone else will handle it. They probably deserve it." Or perhaps most insidiously, we have our own purity codes. We tell ourselves we cannot engage with those people because their politics are wrong, their beliefs are toxic, their lifestyle is impure. We use our own ideologies, our own sense of righteousness, as a holy excuse to withhold compassion. The parable confronts us with a devastating question. Has our own holiness, whatever form it takes, become a barrier to our humanity? And then there is the Samaritan, the one who acts, the one who sees a human being in need and allows that simple fact to override every social, political, and religious category that should have kept them apart. Jesus' story is a permanent, standing challenge. It asks us to look at the people we have been taught to despise, our own personal Samaritans. The person from the other political party, the immigrant, the religious fundamentalist, the atheist, the person whose very existence challenges our worldview. And it asks, are we willing to see their humanity bleeding on the side of the road? And are we willing to cross over? The final, radical truth of the parable is that we are all, at different times, every character in the story. We are the wounded man, in desperate need of a mercy we do not deserve. We are the priest and the Levite, using our own beliefs to justify our inaction. And hopefully, sometimes, we are the Samaritan, choosing to let compassion be our guide. The question, "Who is my neighbor?" was a trap designed to build a wall. Jesus' story is a key designed to unlock a gate that leads us away from the cold safety of our own tribes and onto the dangerous, messy, and sacred road of a love that knows no bounds.